Hi everyone. I've always seen the housing market a little bit like the stock market, but in slow motion. Whereas stocks and commodities and funds may change by a few percentage points in a few hours or even minutes, subject to the changes in supply and demand, the housing market does the same, but is played out over months or even years. So just as some predict downturns in stocks after dramatic rises after the lows of 2020 and the economic recovery in 2021, is the same going to happen to the housing market? Well, in this video, we'll have a look at the issues that may point us in the right direction. I'm Anthony, and as always, we're talking money. Okay, just like stocks, or anything for that matter, the price that we pay for anything is determined by supply and demand. So all we have to do is determine what happens to these two variables, and hey presto, we'll find out what's going to happen to the price, right? Oh gosh, if only life were that simple. If you were to believe some of the adverts that sometimes show in finance YouTube videos, all you need to do to achieve a lifetime of financial freedom is to remortgage the house or not pay off your mortgage early and buy lots of rental properties, hotels, commercial property, etc. And da-da, they make out that you must be some kind of wally if you don't follow this well-trodden strategy. Well, between you and me, not many people out there have ever experienced a proper property downturn. Few can remember when mortgage interest rates were, say, 7%, and even fewer people can remember inflation rates at a similar level. Surely mortgage rates are always under 3%, aren't they? Well, in short, no, they're not. So let's have a look at what happened to house prices in particular over the last 20 years. In nominal terms, they have never been so high. Apart from a few blips, house prices have basically just gone up. One main reason for this is that interest rates have come down, making houses more affordable. This is a classic demand-side issue. Increase money supply by reducing rates, increase credit available and make something more affordable, and the demand goes up and prices follow suit. This probably would be one example of what Milton Friedman would argue causes price inflation. However, talking of inflation, let's put inflation into the equation. House prices peaked in real terms in 2007, 14 years ago, and still haven't reached that level despite some dramatic increases over the last 12 months. So one could argue that prices still have room to grow, but let's not look at historical peaks and think that's the reason and reason alone to expect prices to get there again. For example, the Japanese stock market peaked at 40,000 and some 25 years later, it's still only 25,000 now. Instead, let's go back and have a look at things that may first affect the demand side. Aside from low interest rates already mentioned, the drivers for demand in recent history for houses have been, say, a tax break on stamp duty, which seemed to have got potential buyers to pull forward house purchases to take advantage of the tax. The tax extension provided an extra impetus to complete on a house purchase. But now that the stamp duty holiday is finished, the next driver for demand is the expectation that future rates may well be more expensive in the near future. After all, buy a house now and fix a cheap rate, or wait until next year and pay more in higher rates. Most people, if they could, would rather buy now rather than wait. So this is another demand side pressure. More locally, demand for space after the pandemic raises demands for larger houses. More couples unfortunately split up after pandemic shutdowns, and this leads to an increased demand for smaller homes and flats. Put all this on top of a relentless reduction of fixed rate mortgage deals, and you can see why property has basically been a one-way bet. Another phenomenon that happens once rising prices takes hold is that you see an increased demand from investors that either flip houses to make a quick profit or buy houses to rent with the expectations that the total return can be boosted by an increase in capital on top of the rental yield. On the supply side of things, this is a slightly more complicated variable to analyse. Why should more houses be available on the market to sell? The first obvious reason is looking at how many houses and flats actually are being made and made available for the first time to sell. 2020 saw a dramatic drop in new houses just at the same time that demand was increasing for the reasons given. But aside from new houses, what else would affect the number of houses available? This surprisingly can be quite psychological. In times of natural disaster, the number of sellers tends to decrease. The COVID pandemic is a good example of a natural disaster that the UK thankfully doesn't see too often. But rising prices also sees something else happen. People who are in their 60s, 70s and 80s start to see their home as a way of releasing more money through things like equity release mortgage to take advantage of the increased equity that they have in their property. Ironically, half of those taking out equity release mortgages do so that they can give it to the younger generations to get onto the housing ladder. To temper this reduced supply is the extra profit that house builders can potentially make from increasing prices, leading to an eventual increase in supply. But as mentioned, this just simply didn't happen in 2020. So there can be an element of a bit of a house price spiral in that demand can increase just at the same time that supply is going down. So far, so good. Everything is bubbling away, prices are going up and up, but the elephant in the room is interest rates. The Bank of England has just increased interest rates from a historic low of 0.1% to 0.25% and is widely expected to increase rates further in 2022. Mortgage suppliers have already started to increase fixed rate deals, and the problem is that the average 3-year fixed rate mortgage deal is currently just 1.2%. If the Bank of England increases rates from what it was, 0.1% to say 0.5% by next year, 3-year fixed rates may well increase to 1.8% and well over 2% and beyond if the direction of travel is upwards to keep a check on inflation. This would add over £1,000 a year on variable rates instantly, and add this and more to new entrants to the housing market. The graph here from the FT shows that house prices are the most expensive relative to income for over 100 years, but the real eye-opener is the graph that shows affordability. As a general rule of thumb, many advisors, of which I'm definitely not, so if you're going to take mortgage advice, seek out a proper mortgage advisor, but the general advice is that a mortgage should not exceed 28% of your gross income, or roughly 35% of your net income. But you can see already we're at this rate before any rate rises at all. The latest data from Nationwide Building Society shows that on average about 32% of take-home income goes on the mortgage, well short of the 45% seen in the last peak in 2007, just before the last housing crash. But if mortgage rates go up by 0.5%, then we factor in an extra £1,000 a year on top of the average monthly mortgage payment of approximately £730 a month or £8,760 per year, then this figure would rise from 32% to 37%. If mortgage rates go up by a further 1% from their current rates, then the percentage of take-home income spent on mortgages goes up to 40%. And if mortgage rates go up just 2% higher, then we get to that 46% of take-home income. And we all know what happened when that last happened. So are mortgage rates 2% higher than they are now so far-fetched? Not to anyone with memories of the 1980s and 1990s and early 2000s. I remember buying buy-to-let properties when mortgage rates were over 7%. The key for me is the affordability graph as a determinant of demand. So that's it then. House prices will inevitably reduce if interest rates go up? Not so fast. If economics teaches us one thing, it's that there's no such thing as inevitable. Affordability isn't just measured by what's going out, but also by what's being earned. Oh gosh, this is starting to get quite complicated. With rising interest rates, it can send affordability down, but also higher interest rates could mean that higher wages are on the way in response to higher inflation or increased economic output. Affordability isn't just a function of wages or mortgage rates either. Higher savings rates after 2 years of pandemic restrictions, higher stock markets and greater yields, higher pensions all lead to better affordability, but aren't necessarily recorded in take-home pay records. We can then look at each one of these variables and think of more influences on those variables. Then we can do the same on those variables too. Economics is basically chaos theory in action. The Canadian-born American economist John Galbraith sums up perhaps the most important but ultimately unpredictable feature of markets. He said that mood was everything, in that people or companies are either confident to spend or borrow, indeed lend, or they're not, and it really doesn't matter what or where interest rates are. Of course, one can feed into the other, but mood is affected by weird things that can't be measured, or not necessarily measured. It goes into the sort of national psyche at the time. His book entitled Economics of Innocent Fraud, he noted that the Federal Reserve in America, since its foundation in 1913, has had a record against inflation and against recession of deep inconsequence. Lovely. Basically, the experts get it wrong nearly all the time. On a final note, you really should look up John Kenneth Galbraith, who died in 2006, if only for the lovely simplistic quotes that are attributed to him. He sums up, sometimes with tongue-in-cheek, observations that he's made over the years. One of my favourites is that the function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. Lovely. Well, I know that I haven't really answered the question of whether house prices are about to crash, but then actually no one can actually do this. Hopefully though, you found this video of interest, and if you have, then hit that thumbs up button and the subscribe button to the channel. It really helps me out. Anyway, I'm Anthony, and I'll catch you in the next video where we're always talking money. But until then, bye for now.